What would happen if the West continues to refuse recognition of Ibrahim Traoré as Burkina Faso's president? Despite Western opposition, 10 countries have recently affirmed Traoré as the legitimate leader of Burkina Faso. This move underscores how little influence the West's stance holds over these nations. Whether or not the West approves of Traoré seems irrelevant. No other countries appear to share its perspective. But this raises the question: why is the West so opposed to Traoré? And when will this hostility end? Let's explore. Burkina Faso just marked a pivotal moment in its diplomatic history. Inside the grand halls of the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, a significant ceremony took place. Delegations and ambassadors from 10 countries gathered to formally recognize Ibrahim Traoré as the nation's legitimate head of state. This act wasn't just symbolic. It demonstrated the country's resilience amid ongoing security challenges and its growing importance in regional and global diplomacy. This confrontation, rooted in imperialist aggression, neo-colonial attitudes, and imposed servitude, was not merely political. For Traoré, a former soldier turned statesman, the event represented more than recognition. It was a declaration of solidarity and trust in Burkina Faso's path forward, a path defined by both internal challenges and external resistance. The West's refusal to acknowledge Traoré's leadership highlights deeper geopolitical tensions and a long history of foreign dominance over Africa. Still, the decision of 10 countries to stand with Burkina Faso sent a powerful message. The nation's sovereignty and the democratic will of its people deserve global respect. Leading up to the event, many wondered whether these countries would defy Western pressure and stand by Traoré. That remarkable event provided a definite answer. As Traoré stepped up to speak, representatives from across Africa, Asia, and Latin America stood beside him, offering applause and support. The cheers reflected both appreciation for his words and admiration for Burkina Faso's enduring strength. Since gaining independence in 1960, Burkina Faso has faced coups, political instability, and economic difficulty. Each transition, whether via military force or the ballot box, has tested the country's endurance. Under Traoré, many hoped the country might finally enter a chapter of stability and growth. The international turnout at the ceremony reflected Burkina Faso's growing diplomatic relevance. The days when the country's foreign relations were overshadowed by internal strife are over. Under Traoré's leadership, Burkina Faso is reclaiming its place on the world stage. Western rejection of Traoré's presidency has largely been justified on the grounds of human rights concerns and election transparency, issues that have long stirred debate in African politics. Critics argue that voter intimidation and irregularities marred Traoré's rise, echoing wider fears about democracy in the region. Yet the countries that chose to support Burkina Faso focused instead on the legitimacy of the country's constitutional processes and institutions. Their stance demonstrated a commitment to respecting the will of the Burkinabe people and helping them pursue peace and prosperity. So, what was the atmosphere like at the ceremony? A mixture of celebration and solemn diplomacy filled the presidential palace. Ambassadors from countries including Germany, Russia, Algeria, and Rwanda presented their letters of credence. The event showcased Burkina Faso's hospitality and its ability to conduct state affairs with dignity and protocol. But why does the West still refuse to recognize Traoré? The West's hesitation is rooted in political, historical, and geopolitical concerns. Traoré's rise to power, marked by military coups that unseated President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore in January 2022, and interim President Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba in September 2022, disrupted the constitutional order, alarming many in the West. Western nations strongly emphasized democratic transitions and constitutional legitimacy. Traoré's unconventional ascent, leadership style, and the alliances he's forging have all added to their concerns. For many Western governments, legitimacy is tied to democratic processes, particularly elections, as the rightful way to attain and distribute power. From their perspective, Ibrahim Traoré's rise to leadership through military coups, rather than electoral victory, calls his legitimacy into question. But why does this matter so much to the West? Only Western powers can truly answer that. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative content like this one. Now, back to the issue at hand. Since assuming power, Traoré has shown authoritarian tendencies. Reports have surfaced accusing his government of blocking foreign media outlets and controlling state propaganda, moves viewed by critics as attempts to centralize power and reduce Western influence. These actions clash with the democratic values championed by the West, and many observers view them as signs that Burkina Faso's democratic development is backsliding. The suppression of dissent and limitations on free speech have further strained relations with Western nations, who see such measures as threats to human rights and political stability. In essence, Traoré's refusal to conform to Western expectations and his insistence on rejecting misinformation has heightened the friction. Another key reason for the West's discomfort is Traoré's geopolitical shift. He has moved Burkina Faso away from traditional Western allies, especially France, while deepening ties with Russia. This shift is evident in the expulsion of French military forces and the reopening of the Russian embassy in Burkina Faso. Traoré's participation in the Russia-Africa summit further underscored this alignment. In the broader context of global tensions between the West and Russia, Traoré's pivot is seen as a strategic threat to Western influence in the region. In addition, Traoré's ambitious promises and populist messaging have fueled skepticism in the West. He has vowed to make Burkina Faso self-sufficient in food production, build a nuclear power plant, and manufacture electric vehicles, lofty goals that many Western analysts view with doubt. While these pledges resonate with nationalist and populist sentiments at home, they raise concerns abroad about the feasibility of such undertakings and the rhetoric surrounding them. Complicating matters further is Traoré's strong anti-colonial stance. He has called on African leaders to harness their resources for the continent's prosperity, rather than yielding to pressure from former colonial powers. This message has become central to a growing Pan-African movement focused on reclaiming sovereignty and self-determination. However, from the West's perspective, such rhetoric directly challenges its historic and ongoing influence in Africa. Still, despite Western opposition, 10 countries have recognized Traoré's leadership. Why? Because Burkina Faso, despite its current political turbulence, remains a country of considerable strategic and economic interest. Its rich mineral reserves, history of democratic governance, improving regional diplomacy, and active participation in international institutions make it an appealing partner. Burkina Faso has a relatively strong record of democratic progress. With support from organizations like USAID, the country held its first free and fair presidential election in November 2015, and followed up with municipal elections in May 2016. Despite current instability, this democratic legacy continues to attract countries interested in promoting governance and democratization in Africa. Burkina Faso is also blessed with abundant natural resources. While gold is the primary export, the country also has valuable deposits of manganese, zinc, phosphate, silver, and diamonds. These resources offer lucrative opportunities for international trade and investment, particularly in the mining sector, which plays a crucial role in the country's economic growth and job creation. Beyond its resources, Burkina Faso has historically played an influential role in the West African region. Under former President Blaise Compaoré, the country helped mediate political crises in neighboring nations such as Togo and Niger. Its strategic location and history as a regional peacemaker make Burkina Faso a key player in the Sahel. and an important ally for countries with security and economic interests in the region. Countries committed to maintain peace and security highly value the ability of a nation to serve as a stabilizing force in a volatile region. In the Sahel, an area that includes Mali, Niger, and Chad, multiple challenges persist, such as humanitarian crises, armed conflicts, and the ongoing threat of terrorism. Burkina Faso's strategic relevance has grown due to its proactive role in regional diplomacy and conflict resolution. In recent years, Burkina Faso has significantly improved its diplomatic relations with neighboring West African nations. For instance, it has strengthened bilateral ties with Ghana, fostering cooperation across various sectors. It also resolved a territorial dispute with Mali through peaceful mediation, reducing tensions and promoting regional harmony. For countries that value regional integration and collaboration, Burkina Faso's commitment to diplomacy and peaceful coexistence is a major point of attraction. Stronger regional ties support the broader goals of political stability, economic growth, and collective security throughout West Africa. Additionally, Burkina Faso plays an active role in several international organizations, such as the International Criminal Court and the Liptako Gourma Authority. These memberships reflect the country's dedication to multilateralism and provide platforms for Burkina Faso to raise concerns, engage with the international community, and attract foreign investment and developmental support. This engagement enhances its international credibility and demonstrates a willingness to adhere to global norms and standards. Despite its rich natural resources, Burkina Faso faces considerable development challenges, including widespread poverty, food insecurity, and underdeveloped infrastructure. To address these issues, many countries and international bodies offer humanitarian assistance, technical aid, and economic development programs. These efforts not only improve living conditions within the country, but also promote long-term stability, benefiting both the Burkinabe people and potential international partners and investors. Given all these opportunities and Burkina Faso's willingness to engage globally, why has the West been reluctant to recognize Ibrahim Traoré's leadership? The answer lies in deeper geopolitical and ideological considerations. Western hesitation isn't simply about Burkina Faso's internal affairs. It reflects long-standing patterns in global politics. For decades, Western powers have approached international partnerships in ways that often serve their own strategic and economic interests first, particularly in Africa. Resource-rich nations, like Burkina Faso, have historically seen their wealth extracted under unfavorable terms, with limited local benefit. Mining and trade contracts, for example, have often favored Western corporations, prioritizing their profits over regional development. Maintaining political influence in African states has also been critical for Western strategies, whether in counterterrorism, economic policy, or market access. Development aid from Western countries is frequently tied to political and economic conditions that align with their interests, conditions that can undermine local sovereignty and prioritize Western objectives over domestic needs. Ibrahim Traoré challenges this legacy. His vision for Burkina Faso emphasizes fair, mutually beneficial partnerships. He advocates for agreements that allow the country to retain a larger share of profits from its natural resources and secure meaningful investments for national development. Traoré places a strong focus on independence, reducing foreign dependence, empowering local industries, and harnessing Burkina Faso's resources for its own progress. His outspoken anti-colonial rhetoric calls on African nations to resist neo-colonialism and reclaim their agency. Traoré argues that former colonial powers, and by extension, Western countries, should no longer exploit African wealth and geostrategic positions to serve their own prosperity. Instead, he urges African leaders to assert control over their own futures and economies. This vision stands in stark contrast to the traditional Western approach. By advocating for equity, sovereignty, and reciprocity, In international relations, Traoré is challenging a system where the West historically holds the upper hand. His defiance of that status quo is precisely what makes the West uneasy, even as many other countries are embracing Burkina Faso as a partner on the global stage. The existing arrangements that benefit Western corporations are increasingly threatened by Captain Ibrahim Traoré's push for equitable resource agreements. By demanding fairer conditions for Burkina Faso, Traoré is challenging the historical dominance and profit margins that Western firms have long enjoyed. His stance on sovereignty and his open resistance to Western influence strike directly at the geopolitical control that Western powers seek to maintain in the region. Aligning with among Western powers, particularly Russia, further unsettles Western nations who interpret this realignment as a threat to their strategic and economic foothold in Africa. Traoré's emphasis on self-reliance directly undermines the economic leverage that the West has historically used to shape African policies. By promoting domestic businesses and reducing dependence on foreign aid, he is steering Burkina Faso toward economic autonomy. In response, Western powers have largely withheld diplomatic recognition and engagement, resorting instead to tools of economic pressure, sanctions, conditional aid, and media framing. Western media and political narratives frequently depict Traoré as an authoritarian figure who rose to power undemocratically, while ignoring or diminishing his calls for fair partnerships, sovereignty, and an end to neo-colonialism. The refusal to acknowledge him as a legitimate leader is not just a diplomatic stance. It's part of a broader attempt to delegitimize an alternative model of governance and development that does not align with Western preferences. But in the broader context of global politics, the West's recognition, or lack thereof, is increasingly irrelevant. What matters most is that a growing number of countries do recognize and support Traoré's leadership. These nations, many of them emerging powers or countries outside the traditional Western bloc, see value in building cooperative relationships based on mutual respect and sovereignty. Countries like China and Russia, along with several nations across Africa, Asia, and even Latin America, are stepping forward with offers of investment and partnership. They are willing to support Burkina Faso's mining sector, infrastructure projects, and broader development goals, without the ideological strings often attached to Western aid. These relationships offer not only capital, but also technological know-how and pathways to genuine, sustainable development. And while the West critiques Traoré's leadership style, it rarely addresses the deeper issues affecting Burkina Faso, such as youth unemployment, poor working conditions in artisanal mining, and lack of infrastructure. When young people are forced to dig by hand in life-threatening conditions for gold, we must ask, what is the real definition of terrorism? Is it not economic exploitation, social abandonment, and political neglect? Traoré's alliances with countries that are ready to invest in people, not just profit, hold the promise of lifting Burkinabe youth out of poverty and empowering communities that have long been sidelined. These partnerships are not just about business. They're about freedom. Freedom from dependency, from manipulated narratives, and from economic systems that prioritize foreign interests over national well-being. By expanding its global alliances and reducing its reliance on Western powers, Burkina Faso moves closer to the vision Traoré has put forth, one of sovereignty, dignity, and self-determination. Now the question is, do the 10 countries that now support Traoré's leadership show us that Western policy in Africa is losing relevance? Is this a sign that the old playbook no longer works on a continent that is increasingly demanding respect and equity? Or will the West double down, amplifying misinformation, intensifying economic pressure, and weaponizing media narratives to try to suppress this movement? Either way, Africa is watching, and so is the world. Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.